Okay, so it is 12:01, and we're going to get started now. This is J.C. Watson from the Oahu Invasive Species Council, welcoming everyone to the 10th installment of the HISC Brown Bag series. Today we have our guest speaker is Neville from the Oahu Invasive Species Committee, and she's going to be presenting on the Island Invasive Conference that she attended. So Rachel, you have the presenter tool, and I'll let you take it from here.
All right, thanks. Thanks, everybody. So the Island Invasives Conference was put on by the South Georgia Heritage Trust, I wanted to go because I think the last one was like 7 years ago in New Zealand, and a lot of people that were working on Hawaii projects went to that one, and they also do. They do a proceedings each year, and so I thought it would be that if I could get an abstract accepted, it would be a good way to get Hawaii work in print, because that's something I've been wanting to do for just to kind of formulate OISC results and have it be in a paper, but I would never do it unless someone gave me a deadline. So this picture is kind of an excuse to show you more pictures of penguins, but the reason, so the conference, I think this is the third conference that they've had, and it really grew out of the projects in New Zealand that were eradicating rats from uninhabited islands in order to protect seabirds. And it's kind of a neat story. Tony Martin is a professor at the University of Dundee, and he's also Dundee, Scotland, and he's also the executive director of the South Georgia Heritage Trust. And South Georgia Island is in the, I don't think it's actually in the Antarctic Ocean, but it's like between the tip of South America and Antarctica. And it's one of the islands where Shackleton, I think when Shackleton was trying to get rescued, he went from Antarctica to South Georgia Island and then like walked across the island to get to the whaling station there. But this is what it looks like. And he organized this conference because when he went to the last conference, he felt like all the people there gave him so much help for the rat eradication on South Georgia that he wanted to kind of pay the community back. So I thought that was a really nice sentiment. So this is actually the cover of a book that Tony Martin has written about it's actually like a whole coffee table book about the rat eradication on South Georgia. And I kind of wanted to show you this just so you could kind of see the terrain that they were dealing with. And I think the rat eradication on South Georgia is the largest island that they've ever attempted it on, they being sort of anyone. So it's the largest island where a rat eradication has been attempted using aerial baits. And as you can see, the terrain is pretty gnarly. So that's how many, this is kind of the main room, and so there were about, I think, 250 people that came. So when they had just one session with all the attendees, this room was full. It was a really good conference in that I liked the presentations because they were all about people's projects. There was actually very little research. It was all, we ran this project, here's what worked, and here's what didn't. And I thought that was a really useful format for me as a manager. The one thing, it was very rat-focused, which I didn't realize when I decided to go to it. There was a lot of, not just rats, but also other vertebrates. There was only one plant session, and it was funny because they had the plant session and they had the keynote speaker who was from the Kew Botanic Gardens, and they kind of closed the door and started the session, and the guy from Kew, he's like, all right, plant people, we've got to stick together. And there was like this, and a couple of people had said that to me before, that like the plant people were the minority. But I thought that was kind of funny. So this, speaking of plant people, this is Princess Anne, Charles's sister, and she gave a keynote at the conference. And the reason I have her picture up is because during her keynote at the beginning of the conference, she said, well, we all know eradication are very hard, and plant eradications are so difficult, I don't even want to think about it. And I kind of thought, wow, like, there's like this famous royal person talking about how difficult plant eradications are. And so it kind of made me realize how, I think, like, the stuff that all of us are doing in Hawaii is pretty forward-thinking, in that I think a lot of people are kind of afraid to take it on. That's Julia. She was there, and she was giving a presentation on her work. You guys, Julia was the manager of OISC before me. And that's me talking about Oahu native forests. And that's the data slide from the presentation. Anyone who hasn't seen it yet, I know I've been showing this slide to everybody that will look at it. But I was just basically trying to say that it is possible to, get plants to deal with invasive plants on an island-wide scale. And so, yeah, we've decreased mature trees per square kilometer 96% since we started in 2002. I don't know if you guys went to, people in the audience went to the IUCN. That was here in 2016. There was the Honolulu Challenge was formulated there. And it's basically supposed to be and this is Pierre Genovese, who's the head of the IUCN specialist group on invasive species. So it's basically supposed to be like groups, like nonprofits and countries and other governments will say, okay, we are going to pledge to, say, eradicate rats from all our offshore islands as part of the Honolulu Challenge. And I think there hasn't been quite enough. There was a lot of PR around it during the IUCN in Honolulu, but there hasn't been that much since. And so they had a strategy session to talk about what kinds of projects that people could pledge to the challenge. A lot of the people in the room thought that what they were being asked to do is donate money to the IUCN, and so Pierre cleared that up, that that's not what they were asking. And so some of the projects that have been pledged are, New Zealand has pledged to be predator-free by, I forget when, I think in 10 or 20 years, they've pledged to be predator-free. And Mexico has pledged to eradicate rats from all its offshore islands. And so there's other things like that. And so what the Honolulu Challenge needs to kind of gain momentum is for other people to pledge projects. And part of the reason it's important is because it's kind of like, if you've got like, I don't know, say like 10 or 20 national governments say that they're going to do this really big, bold project on invasive species, then that would get other governments to say, actually, you know what, yeah, we're going to put some money towards this eradication project or biosecurity or whatever. So that's Jean-Yves Mayer, who is in Tahiti and knows a lot about Myconia because Myconia caudescens is really bad there. But he did a presentation on how indigenous people in Tahiti view invasive species, and he found, I think, kind of what we've seen in Hawaii is basically the longer the invasive species is there, the more people accept it and find uses for it, and the less willing they are to support eradication programs. And I asked him for the picture, but he didn't respond to me in time to put it up. But he did have a picture of, there was a Tahitian dance contest, and the people that won for the most innovative costume had skirts made out of Myconia leaves, which was kind of sad. So other interesting presentations and posters that I didn't have photos for are, they did talk about, I don't know if you guys have heard of the CRISPR technique and gene drive. So it's basically, there's a collaborative group, and next day they're the genetic biocontrol of invasive rodents. And basically what it is genetically modifying a mouse, or sorry, a rat using one or two methods. And which I'm sorry, I can't explain them because I'm not a geneticist, but, and you would send this rat into the population and it would only produce certain, like either male offspring or I think they produce all male offspring. And so then after a while, the rat population dies out. And so just in case there's anybody on the line that is immediately opposed to this, this is not something that's going to, it's just something that they're testing. And the technique that they're using for it is also a technique that's being used for trying to deal with genetic diseases in humans. So it's not a genetic technique that they're developing just for this. This is genetic techniques that are being used for human health as well. So, and they talked about dealing, you know, the outreach question, which obviously is, there's probably will be a lot of people that are opposed to this. There would be only certain places they could use it, because anywhere that had native rats, so like the mainland U.S. is not somewhere where they could use this. But it does, to me, it seems like it's a pain-free, pesticide-free way of getting rid of rodents, so it could be a really useful tool. So I'm interested to see what comes out of it. There was a presentation on how removing invasive plants had positive effects on plant pollinator communities. That was really interesting. And South Georgia Island, which looks cold and covered with ice, they're also trying to do plant eradications there. And I felt kind of, there was also a presentation on eradications in New Zealand. They have to deal with an active volcano, and not like an explosively active volcano. So I was there talking about like terrain and how property owners won't let us in for our Myconia surveys. And then like the South Georgia Island people are like, oh, we have glaciers and all these tall mountains. And then New Zealand people are like, yeah, and there's volcanoes. So anyway. There was a really interesting poster from someone from France, which I need to follow up with her. But she said that in France, they have specific criteria to measure watershed health, and that feeds into their policies on protecting watersheds. And one of those criteria is the number of invasive species that are in your watershed. So she had a whole document about it and how it works and how it supports policies and funding. And so I need to get that from her. But I thought that was really interesting. Other themes that popped out at me from all the presentations are that one thing people were saying with respect to rat eradications is that most of the uninhabited islands have already had rats eradicated, and so really, with respect to protecting seabirds, it's really going to be inhabited islands that are the next step. And so, how does that happen, and how do we get people to be all right with that, basically? A lot of people talk about how important outreach and community relations is. And I think I got the feeling they kind of needed more information on what works and what doesn't. Everybody complained about funding. There was, in the keynote speakers, there was a guy who was trying to eradicate mink from the Orkneys. And it was an incipient species, but he said they just didn't get enough funding in the beginning and they couldn't keep up with it. And so it dragged the eradication program out longer. But funding was just something that everybody talked about. And also the fact that they felt like the people that were funding their programs didn't understand what a long-term undertaking it was. And so kind of like trying to get funders to realize that eradicating invasive species is a really important part of restoration, and that's going to take a long time. And then also post-eradication biosecurity. So there were a lot of places. I mean, once these eradications are done, even if it's like an island out in the middle of nowhere, if it's got a dock, a rat can still come back. And so, you know, and I mean, this is obviously an issue with plants too, but just that you have to continue to monitor to make sure that things aren't reinvaded. And that's about it. Questions, comments?